So let's now look at appointing a specialist to carry out your fire risk assessment. Now it's very important that you realise that no matter who carries out the fire risk assessment, the duty holder retains the responsibility for ensuring the adequacy of that assessment. If employing a specialist to undertake your risk assessment, whilst you are not expected to be an expert in fire safety, you should make reasonable checks to ensure that they are competent to do the job properly. There's a lot of risk assessors who work very hard, are diligent and who are competent. However, due to the sector not being regulated, as I mentioned earlier, there are some who are not. So what steps should you take? Well, firstly, be satisfied that the fire risk assessor providing the service is competent to do so. Now, the Competence Council recommends you check that those providing this service have either independent registration with or certification from a professional or certification body, and that they meet the competency criteria established by the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Council. Check that they have experience of undertaking fire risk assessments for your kind of business and premises. Request references from previous clients in premises of your type. Ask these clients if they were satisfied and if any problems were later identified. Now, the guide also recommends that you undertake the following. First of all, ensure that the scope of the work you want carried out is agreed in writing. Ensure that you provide the assessor with access to all areas of the premises and with all relevant information. Obtain alternative quotes, but make sure they cover the same scope so you can compare like with like. Ask for proof that they have sufficient professional indemnity insurance and public liability insurance. Like a lot of councils will require so much indemnity anyway, they might have a requirement for £5 million public liability, for example, and then the risk assessor's got to make sure they've got that liability. Next, you should always assure yourself that the fire risk assessor is impartial. I would say this is very important. This is very important. You don't want to appoint a fire risk assessor who works for a fire alarm company and then specifies a major upgrade to the fire alarm when it may not be required. Or a fire risk assessor who works for an emergency lighting company that over-specifies emergency lighting requirements. You may also find that some fire risk assessors over-specify because they are not confident or have a lack of knowledge what is required. In other words, if they've got any doubt, they will over-specify. If they think, well, I might need emergency lights, I'll put it in, I'm not paying for it. They might specify smoke alarms in every single room, manual call points in buildings that don't necessarily require it. In other words, if they've not got the right knowledge, they might not require, they will generally, possibly, over-specify because it's safer for them. You should also check that you have access to a complaints procedure if necessary. In other words, if something goes wrong, how are you going to complain? And the next one is to ensure that you have adequate records of the steps that you took in selecting your fire risk assessor. Put it in writing that you have taken all reasonable steps to ensure their competence. So how do you check if they are a competent fire risk assessor? Or in other words, how does the fire risk assessor demonstrate competence to you? Just having a load of letters after your name does not mean they are competent. Once you've got a degree in fire engineering, you can join a number of organisations and get more letters after your name. In other words, it doesn't mean that they're competent just because they've got the letters after the name. Well, to demonstrate competence, there are two principal methods. First, you have professional body registration schemes. And secondly, you have certification by a UCAS certification body. Now, while we're discussing these schemes, it's also important that the company for whom the risk assessor works has adequate management systems in place, even if the fire risk assessor is self-employed. Now, the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Council recommends the use of fire risk assessment companies, including sole traders, which are third-party certificated to appropriate schemes operated by certification bodies which have been UCAS accredited to certify against these schemes. So what are the schemes? Well, a scheme identifies what needs to be assessed and what method of assessments are going to be used. Now, there's three main schemes relating to fire risk assessment. You've got a company scheme, you've got a person certification scheme, and you've got a professional body scheme. Now, a company scheme is operated by a certification body and looks at the competence of personnel and the management systems within the company, whereas a person certification scheme is operated again by a certification body and is concerned with the competence of the individual and not the competence of the company. And a professional body scheme is operated by professional bodies and is concerned with the competency in the individual, not the competency of the company. Now, all these schemes will maintain a register which lists the individuals or companies that have been assessed to meet the requirements of the scheme. Now, what about the certification bodies then? Well, certification bodies assess the fire risk assessor, and that's, don't forget, the individual scheme or the company scheme, against the requirements of these schemes. Now, who appoints certification body? Well, it's UKAS, the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, UKAS. They are the national accreditation body recognised by government for this purpose. Now, there's two schemes at present that are UKAS accredited, and they are BAFE and Warrington Certification. Now, the BAFE SP205 scheme sets out requirements to be met by companies and other organisations seeking to provide fire risk assessment services. Now, SP205 requires each scheme member, from a large company to a self-employed individual, to register one or more named persons who will be responsible for the accuracy and quality assurance of every fire risk assessment completed. Now, the professional competence of the named person will be audited by a UKAS accredited third-party certification body which is licensed to administer the BAFE scheme. There will also be audits of the organisation's administrative and quality processes, and auditing will be based on a combination of quality checks on completed fire risk assessments and periodic review of the individual's personal competence. And they will be using the guidelines being developed by the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Council. The next scheme is that offered by Warrington Certification, who are UKAS accredited and offer a scheme under what we know as FRAX. FRAX is the Fire Risk Assessment Competency Scheme, and they offer two schemes. You've got the company scheme and the individual scheme. Now, FRAX has been designed to provide a technical reference for the fire risk assessor using the international standard for bodies operating certification of persons, and this is it here, BSEN ISO IEC 17024 2003. Now, FRAX provides a standardised and nationally recognised certificate of competence. Fire risk assessors who have completed the comprehensive technical evaluation successfully and achieved certification are considered competent to produce risk assessments that are both sufficient and suitable for the purposes of the relevant UK fire safety legislation. Therefore, using a FRAX certificated assessor provides a powerful demonstration that a responsible person or duty holder has exercised due diligence in the selection and appointment of a competent fire risk assessor. Now, what is the company scheme? Well, this is a quality assurance scheme aimed at companies who offer fire risk assessment services. So this is for the company. And they may want to differentiate themselves from competitors through an independent certification scheme. The assessment procedure for certification not only examines the competence of the employees, but it also assesses the quality management systems and procedures operated by the company, thus assuring high standards of service and competence can be delivered by the certified company to their clients on a reliable basis. Now, by using the same core competence assessment as the FRAX scheme for individual assessors, the company scheme provides a benchmark comparison for all assessors and enables the certified company to use subcontract assessors with confidence. Now, it's increasingly important for the responsible person to be able to demonstrate due diligence when appointing a fire risk assessor, and third-party certification is one way of satisfying this requirement. Now I would like to introduce you to Simon Ince from Warrington Certification, who is going to explain how the certification process works, and this will give you an overview of what you can expect if you decide to adopt the FRAX process.
Hi, I'm Simon Ince from Warrington Certification, and I'd like to talk to you about the Fire Risk Assessors Certification Scheme, or FRAX company. So it's the company application we're talking about today. Application for certification couldn't be easier. It's all online at warringtonfire.net. There's an application form there, and you can fill that out and submit it to us. Each company needs a quote, and the reason each company needs a quote is because every company is different. Different number of employees, different regions that they work under. Some could be national, some could be regional. We need to make sure some could use subcontractors. So we need to make sure that we've got a good picture of your company and the locations you work in before we can give you an idea of how much it's going to cost to assess you. To do that, you can submit to us a structure chart. So it outlines who works for you and their responsibilities within the organisation. What we need to know is who the identified managers are. Managers are the people who are ultimately responsible for signing off the reports that go to your clients. So they must be identified clearly from the start. We then ask to work out who the risk assessors are, so who you've identified as just people who do the risk assessments, and then also the admin and support, if they're involved in completing the risk assessments themselves. If they're just general secretaries, take messages, etc., then we don't need to know about them. But if they are actually involved in typing up reports, etc., quoting, then we need to know who they are. First stage is a document submission. Basically, this can all be done online, so don't worry, not like this guy who's nervous about all the amount of paperwork he's had to put together. It can all be done by email, so you can submit those in. We require CV for all the risk assessors and managers. We need a photo ID for everyone, and we also need 2 risk assessments, previous work from the risk assessors, and 4 if they're an identified manager. We also need a copy of your quality manual to review as well. So the procedures and the standard operating procedures that you go through for your company, we need to review that as well. Then we'll come and do an office audit. So the office audit, we actually come to site. Now, hopefully your documentation is all in one site. The main office would be useful. If you've got regional ones, then we might have to do separate audits. But hopefully you've got everything in control under one office. We look at your quality manual. Yeah, we look at that again in situ and see how that equates to the documentation and the procedures you operate on the day. We look at document control, how you control the versions of risk assessments you've got. We look at how you control standards, and we make sure they're all up to date. We look at the quotation and contract process, how you quote and how the contract operates, what's included in that contract. We look at the process control from start to finish, how that job plans out from the initial quote right the way through to delivery. We look at the training and competence records, the identified needs, the requirements, how you keep current when new standards come out, how does that equate to the training you offer your employees. Also in the office audit, we look at the responsibilities and authority. Who's got control of signing off the reports? Who's got control of the training? Who's got the actual authority to issue the reports? We look at any subcontract arrangements you've got. We look at the contracts you've got with subcontractors and how you monitor that. If you subcontract out some work, how do you make sure they comply with your standards? We look at the traceability of contracts. So from start to finish, can we see the job started and can we see the job finish? Customer complaints, if there are any, and record maintenance, how you record all these issues. So when we do an audit, a lot of times we go into companies and they're operating fine, there's no problems, but you can't actually audit that. You can't prove how the process works because the traceability isn't there. So you need to maintain those records. Then we come down to the examination interviews. Now hopefully we can get together on one site and do those. If it's a larger company, we might do regional ones where we get all the people in together to have the exams or the interviews. So managers go through a slightly separate process. They submit more risk assessments. They also go through a slightly more onerous process to test their ability. Obviously, they're the person that's signing off the reports. So we go through a tabletop exercise. So that tabletop exercise, we look at a set of plans for a building and we give them a scenario. We say, work this out. We say, travel distances might be excessive. Can you prove that they are? Or there's a new extension proposed on this building. Can you work out if the escape capacity is sufficient to deal with that? And you come up then with the answers and the resolutions for that. We look at questions and answers on your submitted reports. So, for example, if our lead assessor looks at your reports and works out that you've specified something that looks over the top, we can ask you questions relating to that. So, why did you come to that decision? What alternative did you discuss? And we need to know you've looked at those and actually eliminated those for appropriate reasons. We then give you an interview exam. So this is a specifically designed exam to test your ability. It looks at all areas of risk assessment, from active side, passive side, management side, smoke control, those kind of elements, risk-based assessments. And then we also test your ability to audit a report. So what we look at, we give you a set of reports with known problems within there. And as you're reviewing those, we expect you to pick out the problems that we've actually planted within those reports. The risk assessors themselves go through a slightly different process, but it's based on exactly the same process that the manager's been through. It's the same questions, it's the same identified competencies in those exams. We look at the assessment of risk from fire, applicable legislation, appropriate guidance, behaviour of fire in buildings, the behaviour of people in fire situations, means of escape, fire prevention, fire protection, and that's a passive and active and how they relate, and the management of fire. So those are the competencies identified by the Competence Council, who have produced a standard for fire risk assessment competency. So here's an example of one of the questions that will be asked either orally in the interview or it could be on the written exam. It says, what is the significance of wall and ceiling linings in the spread of fire? It's obviously something a risk assessor needs to be able to know. And the answer is, materials used to line walls and ceilings can contribute significantly to the spread of flame across their surfaces. So if you've got a corridor lined with polystyrene, there's a good chance that if there's a fire in there, it will spread very, very quickly. Obviously, that's not enough information we need from you. We need a bit more detail, so we go drill down a little bit further. How are wall and ceiling linings classified and where can these be used? Class O, suitable for circulation spaces. Class 1, suitable for all rooms but not escape routes. Class 3, suitable for small rooms only. What we then might do is show you some pictures or samples and say, if this is what you're faced with in a corridor, a final escape route, what would you do? How would you test it? How would you clarify exactly what it is? Obviously, we need to see the risk assessments being made. The whole process is start to finish. So we need to go out and actually see a risk assessment being compiled on site. We try and look at 20% of the risk assessors within your company. Depends how many you've got, but ideally we'd like to look at a percentage of. So if there's 10 in your company, it's only 2. It's only 2 accompanied audits. And what we do year on year is we'd actually review everyone. So we go through, so we got through everyone. The on-site surveillance takes the form of an accompanied visit. So we would send a lead assessor. We call them lead assessors, who are competent risk assessors. We've identified that through a process. They've been appointed on a professional basis to do this job. They will come around and accompany you. They'll not discuss your findings with you, but they'll do their own significant findings. They'll review as you would do your risk assessment, and then you will send that risk assessment back to us, and he will compare his findings with your findings for a compatibility check. Now, if there's something obvious that you've missed, like a dead-end situation that you should have picked up, then he will pick that out. Hopefully, obviously, the reports will be compatible and everything will be fine. We issue then a final report. The report on your fire risk assessments are in there. The office audit report, the employee competence report is on there, the on-site visit report is in there, and a certification decision. So if there's any outstanding elements or non-conformances, we will say, this is what you need to put in place. So for example, if one of the employees is struggling with his knowledge of active systems, we'll say, well, that's an area of weakness for that employee. This is what you need to do. This is how you correct it. And when you provide that evidence, we'll include that employee in your certification. It might be something like we've picked up in the office audit that you've not got suitable training records, or you're not managing the training appropriately. You've got no method for covering new standards for all your employees, and we'll say, well, show us how you've demonstrate to us how you've incorporated that into your quality management procedures, and you will provide that information. Hopefully, the certification decision is positive, and you've got that. So this is what the next process is. We issue a certificate of quality assurance. So that says that this company has been third-party assessed, and they can actually do the job they're saying they're doing. We list that company on the WCL register of companies and individuals. We issue photo ID cards to all your employees, and we also put their photographs on our website so people know who should be sending. So that prevents companies from subcontracting work out to non-certificated employees. We give you a certificate for every job. So once you've got a contract in hand, you can certificate that as a quality assured company. So you can provide that responsible person with a certificate that says, you know, you're a quality assured company and you've produced a risk assessment that's suitable and sufficient. You need to take note of the significant findings in there. We don't just leave you. Yeah, we don't just say you're a quality company, off you go, you're fine forever and ever. We have to continue to surveillance you. So we look at ongoing surveillance. So that involves us going out to a live job with auditors to assess them on site. That provides the responsible person with a lot of assurance. If you see someone doing your risk assessment who's been observed themselves and monitored themselves, it gives them a lot of comfort. Also, we do an annual office audit, so we take that traceability. We look at the records again on an annual basis to make sure that you're maintaining those standards and also moving forward in terms of training and competence of your individuals. Obviously, if you need to find out some more information, you can go to warringtonfire.net or you can contact us on the numbers shown. Thank you.
The last one is professional body person registration schemes, with the main ones being the Institute of Fire Prevention Officers, the Institute of Fire Engineers, and the Institute of Fire Safety Managers. These are all professional bodies who offer a personal registration scheme.